Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I had an opportunity to record a podcast with Dr. Peterson. Before we get to that episode, I want you to go to OnlineGreatBooks.com, and you can either sign up for our VIP waiting list and get some goodies from us. You'll get a executive summary of how to read a book. You'll get a synopsis of our reading list and some other resources that'll be useful to you. I'll make it worth your email address if you do that. Or you can go and actually sign up and join our service. If you use the promo code Peterson, you'll get 25% off your first 3 months with us. So go to OnlineGreatBooks.com and enter the promo code Peterson and enjoy the show. Thanks.
Hello, Scott.
Yes, sir.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'll just go right into it. I've got Dr. Jordan Peterson with me. He needs no introduction. You guys know who he is. And we're going to discuss the great books today and what they mean to Dr. Peterson. So thank you for doing this with me.
My pleasure.
I read your 12 Rules for Life and Maps of Meaning, and you quote from the books of the Western canon all the time. And, it's my belief that these books are for everyone. They're not just for academics. And so tell me.
They're hardly for academics at all anymore.
Anymore. I agree with that. Tell me why you think that we as normal people who are just trying to live good lives should read these books.
Well, that's the issue there. The issue that you just discussed there at the end is to live a good life. It's like, well, what do you mean by that exactly? And that's what the humanities is about. The humanities are about. They're about how to live a good life. And concretely, like if the abstractions in the great books are taught properly, then they help you understand what a good life might be. And you might say, well, why should I bother? And the answer to that is, well, how much unnecessary misery, suffering, and horror do you want? The alternative to that is to live as good a life as you can. And then, and you have to think that through, and or not. But if you don't think it through, then you're sort of stumbling around in the darkness. And so you want to read great books because they help you learn to think and to speak. And even both of those things, you have to think so that you can figure out how to act, because thinking is the precursor to action, unless the action is impulsive, in which case it's going to lead you into dark places very frequently.
Right.
And if you can learn to speak as well and formulate your thoughts properly, and so that's also why it's necessary to write if you're going to be reading,
right?
Then you're better at formulating what you want and need, and you're better at making plans, and you're better at negotiating, and you're better at bringing people together and establishing a consensus, and you're better at making your case if you need to negotiate for your salary. It's like all of that is of unbelievable practical utility.
Yeah, so we think that you don't just read the books, right? There's the trivium, the grammar, the logic, the rhetoric, right? We get the grammar, we learn the kind of the bones of the subject in front of us, the bones of a particular kind of philosophy maybe. And then we understand the logic and we start to assemble those bones of that. And then we have to have the rhetoric part. That's the persuasion part that you're talking about, or the teaching part. And so, at OnlineGreatBooks.com, we don't just read the stuff. We also get in these Socratic seminars where we discuss it and hold each other accountable for what we say. And, that piece where we talk about the things that are difficult, I think is the part that makes, discussing these books maybe more important than reading them, right? You have to read them to discuss them, but I think it's more
conceivably, important. At least reading them gives everybody it gives everyone something to concentrate on while they're speaking or writing. But partly what you're doing when you're using the Socratic method is you're improving your ability to communicate.
Right.
So, and there isn't anything that's better than that's better for you than that. Because so much depends on everything you do with other people, and every abstraction that you formulate that's dependent on thought is dependent on your ability to communicate properly. And so the more you sharpen that, the more you get better at everything. So your comment about whether it's the reading or it's the discussion that's of primary relevance, it's like, well, it's not obvious because it's not obvious what a good university does. Certainly it introduces people to books that are worth reading. But even that's part of the Socratic dialogue, because if you're reading properly, you're having a discussion with the author. You read and then you think for a while, and then you read again and you think for a while, and then that's all the prodroma, let's say, to being able to formulate your thoughts so that you can discuss them with others. The crucial issue is to sharpen your logos, right? Is to sharpen your ability to use communication to orient yourself in the world. And people think the humanities aren't practical. It's like, that's just out. If they're not practical, they're taught or understood wrong. They're more practical than anything else because everything depends on communication.
We don't even believe in teaching. In fact, I tell the folks that lead our Socratic seminars that if they get caught teaching, they're fired. Right? Mm-hmm. We're there to hold the reader accountable for what they say they believe. Right? If the guy says, "Well, I believe this about, I don't know, the Gorgias," reading some Plato, he needs to be able to explain to us why he believes that. We don't necessarily have to agree, but he needs to know why he believes what he believes. So we don't want to teach. I think that's
right. You don't want to give advice.
No, I don't want to. No. I don't want to. It's just so arrogant to think that you could teach Plato.
Ideas. It's like, no, they're not your ideas. They're someone else's ideas, and they're not in great shape. And so you start reading, and you think, oh, I see. This is how this fits together, and this needs to be fleshed out, and this is where I'm weak, and where my foundation is damaged, and my superstructure isn't organized properly. And so this is also the thing that people don't understand about history. History is actually you. When you're reading history, you're reading about you. You think, well, these are other people. It's like, no, you're the product of history. And unless you understand history, you don't understand who you are. And the history of ideas is the same thing. It's not like you're not living out those ideas.
Yes. So you bring up history and ideas, or like maybe ideas in a scope of history. So do you believe there's such a thing as a Western canon? That's a question that people are debating somehow.
Well, I think it's a stupid question. I do. I think it's technically a stupid question. Here's why. Imagine that you could rank order books by how much influence they had on other books. Mm-hmm. So there's some books that are hardly influential at all. And then there's some books like the Bible or Paradise Lost or Dante's Inferno that have influenced almost every book you can imagine.
Right.
Well, that's the canon. It's not some arbitrary decision. It's like the rank order all the books in terms of their influence. Take the 100 books that have influenced the most other books. That's the canon. And the postmodernists say, well, that's all arbitrary. It's not arbitrary. It's just a map.
Right. Yeah.
So why is Plato part of the canon? Well, partly because of where he was situated in history. He was among the first to be encapsulated in the written word, Socrates, and he's been of unbelievable influence. So the reason you want to read Plato, is because he's everywhere.
That's right. He's everywhere. The canon, I believe, and what you're saying seems to jive with this. It's emergent. So if you pick up Nietzsche,
yes, emergent.
If you pick up Nietzsche, he's going to say something about Kant. You say, "Gosh, I need to go read this Kant guy," and then you pick that up, and then he says something about Aquinas. Well, gosh, you go pick him up. You drill all the way down. You end up at Homer.
Right.
And any of these books, they're self-referential, and you can draw a family tree of these ideas. And
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
You draw the family tree, and you look for the most influential ancestors. That's the canon. It's not like a bunch of people it's not like a bunch of dead white men got together and had a vote.
Right.
This is so dumb. It's like, it's obvious that there's a canon. Now, that doesn't mean that the canon is without flaws. It doesn't mean that there aren't new books that might have interesting ideas in them. It doesn't mean any of that. But it does mean that we already have a structure of thought and a structure of society. And those books are the fundamental building blocks of that structure. So it's just a indication of how far off the mark the universities have fallen to note that the question, is there a canon, could even exist. It's like, if you ask that, all that it means is you don't know what a canon is.
Right. Right.
So it's like you can dispute, you can debate about the utility of the biblical stories. That's fine. But what you can't debate is that they're foundational. They're absolutely foundational. So do you need to know them? Well, it depends on what you mean by need. Do you need to understand who you are? Well, if you want to pilot yourself through life with some degree of what nobility, I like that word,
right.
then you should understand who you are. And the more you understand, the better. So, yeah, it's.
In fact, you say the nobility idea. In fact, our new online Great Books T-shirts say on the back say the noble things are difficult.
Yeah, great.
Because we're getting this stuff so hard sometimes. So, tell me, which of these books did you read, and then where it clicked that there was a canon, or that this was a great conversation that you could eavesdrop on? Does that make sense? Like for me, I picked up the Plato's Republic, and there were ideas in there and names mentioned that I wasn't hip to, and I thought, oh my gosh, there's something going on here, and I've stumbled into it.
Well, I was fortunate when I was a kid. I started reading reasonably good books when I was about 13 because I had a librarian who was feeding them to me. And they were more books that would be part of the modern canon. George Orwell, Aldous Huxley,
yep.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Hemingway, the people who've been regarded as the masters of 20th century literature, let's say.
What was that librarian's name?
Her name was Sandra Notley.
Sandra Notley.
And she was the wife of the member of parliament for our district, provincially, so at the state level, let's say. And she was also the wife of the only socialist member of government in our state, in Alberta, in our province. But she was one of these people who, despite the fact that she was left-leaning, she had me read all sorts of things, including Ayn Rand, because she thought, well, I should expose myself to the opposing points of view as well. So that was my first introduction, I would say. And then I was fortunate. I went to a small college about 90 miles from my town, way up in northern Alberta, called Grand Prairie Regional College. And I had some excellent professors there, some people who really wanted to teach. One of them was named Dennis Wheeler. He was a professor of political science, which is my first major. And myself and a couple of friends had a small seminar with him where we read great books, the great works of political philosophy, or we familiarized ourselves with them anyways. I mean, there's a limit to how many great books you can read in one semester or 1 year, but we at least familiarized ourselves with Thomas Hobbes, the Leviathan and the Republic. And I don't remember which book we were introduced to, which of Aristotle's works, but a whole sequence of classic works in political philosophy. And at the same time, I was taking literature with another professor, Robin, his name escapes me, unfortunately, but he was also a very good professor of English. He was the first person who really taught me how to read or write. I thought I could write because I always got good grades in high school, but I couldn't write at all. It's just that everyone else wrote abysmally, and I was only dismal.
Right.
So he, and that's where we read some of the great books of the 20th century. And that's where I first familiarized myself with what great literature might be. And then of course, when I continued my education, I kept expanding my reading outward. And I became more and more aware that there was a great conversation that had extended over centuries. And I got more and more interested in, I suppose as I got interested in deeper literature, I got more interested in religious ideas too, because at some point deep literature shades into religious ideation. Mm-hmm. And I mean, just last week, I was reading a book on Kant by Roger Scruton. It was an introduction to Kant's thinking because I was having a debate with Sam Harris about the relationship between facts and values. Like if you're a thinker, you have to go back and familiarize yourself with as much of this thought as you possibly can, because otherwise it's like you have great gaps it's like you have brain damage. If you don't know these arguments, it's like you have a real low resolution representation of the ideas and you're kind of running on that, but it doesn't have the depth and sophistication that's necessary. And you think, well, why is it necessary? It's like, well, you have to make ethical decisions in your life and you have to justify them.
So would you say that this reading these books, you say it's necessary, and I agree. Put my money where my mouth is, and trying to make this happen for people. The fact that it's necessary, does that allude to this being a liberal education? I mean, that education which makes us free.
There's a reason why rich people always had their children undergo a liberal education. It's not like these people are stupid.
Right.
They knew that was a practical guide to leadership. It wasn't as concretely useful as an engineering degree might be. And believe me, I'm not saying anything negative about engineering degrees. I like engineers. I like the way they think because they're really bound by practical necessity. So I've got great admiration for engineers. But the thing is that a liberal arts education teaches you how to communicate and strategize in a deep manner. And if you're going to operate at the highest levels, it isn't optional. Like I've watched this for years, and I've known some people who have been extraordinarily powerful and influential in the best possible way because it was allied with their competence. And like those people know how to formulate an argument, man. Great lawyers, they formulate an argument. You don't mess with their argument. It's rock bloody solid. And so they can move forward in a massively effective way in the world. And everyone I've ever met who's become radically successful is incredibly good at articulating their position.
Right, and that's that rhetoric part. And so many law schools still teach by the Socratic method, or at least a lot of their classes are in the Socratic method. I certainly believe in it.
Yeah, well, a lawyer without an argument is just without an argument. And an argument
is a clerk.
Like an argument isn't. Yeah, well, exactly right. And it's even more than that. It's like a lawyer who isn't a clerk, who can't negotiate with clients and expand the business is just a lawyer. Like the people who are operating at the top of the legal profession, not only can they do what a clerk does and can they do what a lawyer does, but they can also go out there among strangers and drum up business and charm people. And it isn't manipulative, not if they're good at it. Sometimes manipulators can get ahead. But most of the time, people figure them out and toss them away, and then they have to go manipulate somewhere else. The people who are spectacularly successful are gifted at communication in every realm they attempt. And a lot of that's allied with deep knowledge, but even more importantly, the ability to utilize words with incredible facility. And reading really helps that, and discussing what you read and writing about it. Those things aren't, if you want to operate effectively in the world, those aren't optional.
Yeah, it's like, until we get some sort of a USB cable where I can hook my consciousness directly to yours, the words are the only way that we can do that. The words are the only way that we can connect to the other. And if we don't listen carefully, read carefully, and then speak carefully, you can't have an authentic connection with the other person.
Well, and the other thing too is we'll never be able to hook our consciousnesses directly together to some degree because you're different than me, and that means you have to take the wisdom that's generic in some sense, and you have to make it yours. Mm-hmm. And the way you make it yours is by translating it into your own words. Like every writing coach says, use your own words, but they never say why. And the answer to the question, why should you use your own words, is because it isn't yours until you formulate it in your own words. And so you say, well, who cares if it's yours? It's like, look, these are tools. Unless they're fitted for your grasp, you can't use them.
Right.
And you might say, well, why do you need tools? It's like, well, what do you want to confront the world without tools? Good luck to you.
So in our logo, there's an anvil in it. It's a little crest. There's an anvil in it. And Carl Schute, who teaches or leads a lot of our seminars, he says that these great books are the anvil against which we beat our brains to make them into better tools suited for our lives.
Yeah, that's good. Sure, absolutely. The anvil motif is a really good one because you have to heat and tap iron to temper it.
Right. Yeah.
And the heat is often the heat of the discussion. A heated discussion is a discussion that can produce transformation, especially if everyone keeps their temper, and that's also another metallurgic metaphor.
Yeah. When we go into these seminars, we make arguments. And we should make arguments, right? If I believe something, I'm trying to get you to believe the same thing or to come around to my way of thinking or at least understand what I'm trying to say. I need to make a series of statements that support what I think so that you can understand that. Those are arguments. Arguments have been the meaning of that word has changed, and now it's a vituperative, angry interaction.
Yeah.
And I want
that
more
is
people.
what it is. If the people, that is what an argument is. If the people who are conducting it aren't articulate and wise, like an argument is how people who can't think.
Oh,
A vituperative argument is how people who can't think. And they can't think very well. And so it degenerates. And then it can degenerate into physical combat. And that's how people who really can't think.
So you think that when there's an angry exchange of words, that is a manifestation of this anger that person carries with them?
Sure. Well, look, what do you tell a 3-year-old who's having a temper tantrum? Use your words. Well, the 3-year-old can't, which is why they're having a temper tantrum. And I mean, look, I'm not saying that every discussion should be without emotion. You can flavor your discussion with emotion, because a bit of aggression, let's say, that's integrated into the argument can make it more forceful and it can push through opposition. But it's only when the articulated space degenerates that the aggression is necessary. And it's rather counterproductive. Like, generally speaking, if you can hold your temper, it shows that you're the better man.
I just had I did a podcast. I was a guest on a podcast, and we compared and contrasted Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France with some work by Voltaire. And I was in there with some really smart guys, and we essentially just had a seminar. And when we got and we didn't agree about hardly anything. And when I got done with that, man, I was just wrung out.
Right, yeah.
It was a super intense experience, and I had to stop and think about what had happened and make myself not react in an angry way. I mean, it's so confrontational to have your ideas, criticized, picked apart. It feels so confrontational.
Well, you don't want to have your tools destroyed, even if they're not very good. Like maybe you're out there trying to chop down a tree with a hammer, and someone comes along and says, that's not an axe. And you say, well, it's better than the palm of my hand. But it's true that it's not as good as an axe. And so what you want to, I guess part of the way that you can maintain your temper when you're trying to defend your ideas is to continue to hope that what the argument will do is provide you with better tools.
Right. That's exactly right.
A good argument should do that. You should both emerge from a good argument with better tools, not with no tools. That's not so good. Sometimes that happens, but the point should be to furnish everyone with even better tools.
Yeah, and when I got done with that discussion, that was actually the conclusion I made was, they proved me wrong in a couple of these places, but I understand this better and I'm better for it. But my first reaction was I was pissed off.
Yeah.
And I know better. And we do that,
yeah.
and I got 150 people right now that are reading either Plato or Aeschylus or Euripides or Sophocles or Homer, and they're doing that to each other for 2 hours a month in these seminars. And sometimes I look in, and I have to turn the camera off because we do these in these Zoom classrooms. I have to turn the camera off and I just tear up because they're just, there are guys that do work in body shops and mechanics and just normal people, and they're just going at it. And
I know, it's so cool. Well, I see the same thing in this tour, and people are, we saw the same thing in Vancouver. I just went there and had a 2.5 hour public discussions with Sam Harris about the relationship between facts and values, which is a very esoteric subject, but a very crucial one, or about the relationship between science and religion, because that's another way of thinking about it, or facts and ethics, another way of thinking about it. And there's 3,000 people there each night, and they're just glued right to it. It turns out that there's a hunger for this. It's obviously a hunger that you're partly feeding. And it's because this is valuable. It's unbelievably valuable. Your life depends on it. So strangely, it's not optional if you want to avoid stupid suffering. Thinking is not optional if you want to avoid stupid suffering.
There's a certain amount of suffering that comes from this too, which is, it's almost like once you've read some of these things,
that's voluntary. It's voluntary and sacrificial. It's like, okay, I'm going to put myself, it's like lifting weights. It hurts, but you hope that the sacrifice pays off with future gain for everyone. And it certainly does.
So what do you think that your project is at this point? Like, I want people to read these books. I want people to be able to enter into discourse with other people in their lives every day in a more civil and deeper way. I mean, that's kind of what my project is.
Yeah, that's a good project, man. That's the furtherance of the Logos. It's like, let's make everybody more articulate.
So let's
ground them better in ancient wisdom. That'll make everybody's life better. What's that?
What's Peterson's project right now?
Oh, that's it. I would say it's a variant of that. I mean, it breaks down into other things. I mean, I'm doing this lecture tour right now, but mostly what I'm doing with that tour is having a discussion with people about vision and responsibility and why there's meaning to be had in the adoption of responsibility under the guidelines of a sophisticated vision, and why that's not optional. It's like, it's the same thing. Like, in some sense, you're having people read these great books so they can sharpen their vision of the world. It's like, well, why? Well, so you have great things to aim at. Well, why do you want great things to aim at? Because there's meaning in aiming at what's great.
Yeah,
why do you need meaning? Because it's the antidote to suffering.
Yeah, we want greatness and nobility in our lives.
Well, unless we want the opposite, which is weakness and cowardice. We want that. It just makes everything worse.
Gosh, do people ever want something that they know is bad?
Oh, sure. All the time, because lots of times when you want something that you know is good, it requires sacrifice because you have to delay gratification. And so lots of times people will go for impulsive short-term pleasures.
But they see the good in the short-term pleasure. Plato and the Meno.
Yeah, but it's usually because they're all yes and no. It's pretty fun to go out and have 10 beer, but most people know that that's not so good that's a really nice 3-hour decision, but as a 48-hour decision, it's really not a very good one.
So scale matters.
Well, yeah, the time frame matters. Yeah, exactly. And there's lots of things that appear positive and attractive in the very short term that are, not so good in the medium term and absolutely bloody catastrophic in the long term. But that doesn't mean that sacrificing those pleasures is easy or that it comes without a cost. So it's easy for people to avoid what's difficult and responsible, but the problem is it doesn't work.
Right. That's the biggest obstacle to getting people to read these books is, foregoing a short-term pleasure or short-term gain for the long-term gain. Do
you have audiobook versions of them?
Well, I mean, they are out there. They certainly are out there. We send everyone a hard copy, but they certainly are available. I'm prejudiced.
One of the things I've noticed is that a lot more people can listen than can read.
Certainly.
Yeah, so that might be something to discuss with your students, is that they could use an amalgam. But the other thing about listening that's really helpful is that you can do it when you're doing other things.
Right. I tell you, I'm not smart enough to multitask and take in some Aristotle.
Well, fair enough. But you might be able to multitask while you were doing dishes or something that was really mundane.
Right. Yeah, so, getting the people to forego those short-term gains for this longer-term project is really tough, but I keep telling people 5 years is going to pass. Now, 5 years from now, you could have possibly read, 12,000 pages of these fantastic books, or you could have binge-watched another series on, HBO or whatever. How do I make this argument for people? How do I get people to...
That's a good argument. Well, I think the argument, I sort of made it in a condensed form when I was talking about the relationship between responsibility and meaning. It's like, well, do you need to know how to think or not?
Right.
Well, yes. Why? Because you have to think about what you're going to do and what you're going to see and what you're going to aim at. Well, what if you don't? Well, then you see badly, you aim wrong, and you suffer, and so do the people around you. It's like, well, so you better learn to think. Okay, I need to learn to think. Well, who are you going to learn from? Well, how about the best?
Right.
Well, I want to learn from the worst. Well, maybe you can't learn from the best because you're not sophisticated enough to start with the best. Well, but your approach helps scaffold people for that. It's like, if you're going to learn to think, learn from the best, which is why we had a canon in the universities, is so that people could go there and they could learn from the best. We say, well, the best, that's arbitrary. It's like, no, it's not. No. The best, by definition, at least the definition that works here, is the best is what's had the broadest range of influence. And that's at least the best to understand who we are now, which is something, you know. Maybe you could add to that something else you need to know to figure out where we should go. But we could at least start out by figuring out where we are and why.
Yeah, knowing where you are is essential for figuring out where you're going to get where you want to go.
Try using a map without knowing where you are. It's not helpful.
Well, this has been our 45 minutes, sir. I certainly hate to. Yes. I want to be respectful of your time, but
appreciate that.
Thank you so much for being willing to do this, and thank you so much for your work every day. I know that.
My pleasure.
Thanks for giving me this time today.
You bet. Good luck with your project. I hope you get 1,000 people signed up for it.
Me too. You're going to be a big help in that. I thank you so much.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how people respond to the tweet.
I'll give you a report.
Okay, good.
Thank you, sir. That was the show with Dr. Peterson. That was high pressure. I was super, super nervous. I'm not a person that really gets nervous very often. Do public speaking from time to time and record another podcast. And yeah, I don't get nervous, but I was shaken during that. He's a very kind and patient man, but he's so verbally acute and so fast that I found myself really being intimidated. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I certainly did. Once the smoke cleared and my adrenaline went away, I was really glad I did it, and I feel like I'm a better person for it, and I hope you guys are too. Just a reminder, we don't do this thing entirely for free. We do this because I want you guys to sign up. So go to onlinegreatbooks.com and enter that promo code Peterson to get 25% off your first 3 months with us. He's given us a ringing endorsement, and I hope you want to try to read these books. Certainly you can try to do that on your own. I encourage people to do that. But if you're ready to join a community and actually do that seminar and take part in the rhetoric portion of this study that Dr. Peterson and I talked about so much, go and try it out with us. We'll help you in any way we can. Thanks for listening.